Welcome back to Franchisors.com. Thank you all so much for hopping on and joining us again today. I am with one of my very first bosses, my old intern center. We are at BrightStar Care here in Gurnee, Illinois, not too far from where I originally grew up. I have my co-host Ryan, of course, who is with me, and her reputation precedes her. She is one of my mentors in the space, so I'm incredibly excited to have her speak with us today, the CEO and founder, Mrs. Shelly. How you doing?
So great to see you.
Great to see you too. She's super excited to have me moving back to Chicago, so this will be the first of many times I'm sure I'll be down here, up here to Gurnee, but I'm really excited to get into this. I love your story, so I think that this will be a really great place for people to learn a little bit more about, how BrightStar got started. So if we dive in quickly, when you were building out your team in the early days, what department did you guys really prioritize building out first?
The first investment that I made when starting to franchise was technology. So hired an IT director, started building a proprietary platform so that eventually all of our franchisees could be on the same system, knowing that I'd want to have access to all of the information to be able to benchmark across our system. That was a good hire. That was a good investment. My next hire was not probably the smartest hire. Was trying to no longer have to do accounting. I'm an accountant by background. So I was like, I want to not have to do that. So I hired an accountant. When dollars are tight, as a startup, it would have been smart to keep doing the things that I knew how to do and hire someone that probably had experience in franchising, if I could go back and do that again. So my second hire was an accountant. And my third was kind of a generalist who did franchise sales but didn't have franchise experience. It was right to hire someone to do franchise sales, but I should have spent $30,000 more and had someone who had actual franchise sales experience.
Sure, yeah. And that's actually the first time that we've heard anybody say that the IT director was the first thing they hired. So I think that that's really interesting, and it says a lot about, how your business has evolved over the years, because that's really where you started. You guys wanted to be a tech company first, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's also valuable feedback on what not to do. Good feedback. Looking at the first, did you have any follow-up questions to that, by the way? Looking at the first wave of franchisees, obviously your first group of franchisees are very important. Talk about what the first set of franchisees for you look like, and maybe how that process changed over time and how the profile changed over time.
Yeah, so some of the ones you don't talk about are the ones that you sell that are family or friends that you have to buy back because they don't do well and don't follow the model. So everybody says don't sell to friends and family. Really, don't sell to friends and family. So I sold to a girlfriend's daughter who was a nurse, and she rarely came into the office and didn't want to work hard. But to make it go away, I had to write a check so I could move on. But I took good legal advice and wrote a check so I could move on. And then our next wave of franchisees were very sales-oriented, driven individuals that were very entrepreneurial spirited, very able to and desired to color outside the lines. And I think we needed that, in those early days, because we were still kind of figuring it out, and we needed people who were gonna help us go faster. So that was probably our first 10 to 15, very sales oriented, very driven, very entrepreneurial. And then I think after that we kind of adjusted. Certainly the profile that we have now is less sales focused and more operations focused, more inside role versus outside role. There's more moving parts inside, and they hire an outside salesperson versus be the outside salesperson, and we're looking for someone who's still driven but maybe more willing to color inside the lines and outside the lines and follow a model versus challenge the model. I think we needed in the very beginning to have the model challenged so we could have the model become what it has become. But now, and I would argue for probably the last 4 or 5 years, the model is what we want the model to be, and what we need to now focus on sustainability and consistency of the model. And so we need more people who are buying into something and are willing to follow it. So less entrepreneurial in the sense that they want to challenge and change. And they want to use that entrepreneurial spirit to just keep breaking new records, but taking the model and following it.
Yeah, follow the playbook rather than invent it.
Correct.
One follow-up question, because I think it would be important for context on the audience. Do you think that you said in the beginning, no friends, no family? Do you think that holds true regardless of industry, or do you think that might have been a little unique for your business model?
I think it holds true
Okay.
regardless of industry. I mean, at least those that I've talked to, because I think rarely do friends and family work as hard. My best intern and dearest friend accepted because he busted his butt and he was a dear intern, and I worked him hard because I knew I could. But that was a precondition I had with Brad and Sherry first.
And he's an exception because
And
he's a very hard worker.
He's
Yeah.
a very hard worker. So would I have sold Zach a business and know he would have been successful? Yes. But I think few who want to come in as friends and family, they think they're getting something. They probably don't have the fire in the belly to work it as hard. And so is there an exception? But I'd really be testing that against grit. And did they get a special deal? If they're getting a special deal to get those first ones done, I think regardless of industry, that's dangerous, because you need somebody who's really gonna pressure test it and work their butts off as you're refining a model and making it work in the early stages. And someone who feels like they're doing you a favor, that's a challenge.
Excellent feedback.
Sure, yeah, and I think that one thing that I know, and you touched on the fact that I spent some time here as an intern and all of that, one thing that I always noticed that was pretty amazing, because the space now has become a little bit more crowded than it once was when I was working here back in 2011 or 2012.
I was still 29 then.
Yeah,
And I haven't aged.
I know.
Oh,
It's
that's
amazing. And I think that one thing that is really interesting that I saw firsthand is, about how you guys are differentiating yourselves, both on the franchise development side and on the consumer side as well. So if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about, how you guys have done that, and if there's really any tools that you can that you think have really helped you guys to succeed in doing this.
Yeah, I think a lot of it gets back to the first hire that I made, right? We really differentiated based upon technology. So if I think about, franchise prospects are more sophisticated today than they have ever been before. They have more access to information. They demand more of return. 1% unemployment, it's not as though they don't have an opportunity to go find something else to do. So the returns are going to have to be good. So having a very strong item 19, knowing what your numbers are, being able to know what all of our franchisees' performance has been all along the entire journey, I think has been very powerful. We've, from the very beginning, our very first franchise disclosure document, back then, Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, UFOC, not so friendly. But from the very beginning, we've always disclosed an item 19. We've always disclosed our franchisee performance. We've been able to add more with time, but sales has always been in there. Quartiles of sales have always been in there. Gross margin of our franchisees have always been in there. We're now getting ready to be able to add EBITDA for our franchisees, because we've got 100% of our franchisees that we're collecting financial information for.
That's pretty impressive.
That was a big requirement for 2019. We defaulted 9. We had to terminate 1, but we were determined that we were going to have 100% franchisee compliance. It's always been in our agreement. We had the right to do it. We never had put on our big girl pants and been willing to do it. So in 2018, we clearly communicated. In 2019, we came into the year with 100% compliance on financial statements. So now we're publishing cohorts of EBITDA. So I think what makes us unusual is that our franchisees are able to talk about that with prospects as to how are we able to share profitability? How are we focused on profitability? How are we setting goals around moving up profitability for our franchisees every year by cohort, by 0.5 point to 1 point, really making sure that our franchisees are continuing to deliver more from a business model. And at the consumer level, I think we have broaden the business model, full continuum of care. I mean, there's a lot of competitors in the space that still only do companion care, personal care. Some say they do skilled care, but it's not consistent across all locations. The brand doesn't do skilled care. Some of their franchisees have innovatively done skilled care. That's different than the brand. Our brand does the full continuum of care. So we're really emphasizing being able to be the full continuum of care in all markets very consistently. And I think that's unique. all of our locations have a registered nurse overseeing the quality of care, which I think gives comfort to a franchisee being able to come in without a healthcare background and have a risk mitigation strategy in place, that they've got someone who understands quality, understands clinical, with a director of nursing who's in place from day one as part of the business model. And that's really comforting to the families that we're taking care of, that they're able to talk to our nurse that isn't a temp nurse who's coming in and meets them once, and then you don't get to talk to the same nurse consistently over time. From our family's perspective, we've got a nurse who's a part of their care at the beginning, and as that family continues to work with BrightStar. And then, we've been, very aggressive in building a national accounts program as well. We recognize that having Joint Commission accreditation, having this technology platform where we have data and know how well our franchisees are doing, we know what our utilization has been, we know what our outcomes have been, and being able to share that uniquely allows us to align with some very large payers to be able to give revenue to our franchisees that they don't have to go get on their own. And we've been unique in being able to grow that at very significant scale. I mean, we're a brand that should tip towards $500 million in the next 6 months, and 1/5 of that is national accounts. I mean, so to think that 20% of a franchisee's revenue is coming from revenue that they didn't have to go make happen. They have to fulfill it, but that the sales effort has been done on their behalf is very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That leads. And I find it interesting is your first two questions, she first went to technology, which was different than anything that
we haven't
heard.
had that yet.
And then my first question, I thought that was really good insight. And then the differentiation question, you took it straight basically to unit economics. So from the beginning, it sounds like you've had a very specific focus on making sure franchisees are profitable, because that's what propels everything and that's what makes everything go around. So speak to I guess just in general, the importance of the focus on unit economics, and if there's anything else that you haven't shared kind of within that topic, maybe how you're sharing data with franchisees and in between the system, but is there anything else you would add to that?
I mean, I think, there's always an opportunity to continue to iterate the model and derive more profit for the franchisees out of it. I think that's important. Franchisees are in this not to just make a difference in their community, but to derive a profit. I think we uniquely have a profitability committee made up of franchisees. So we have a franchise advisory council. We have an advertising and marketing council, not unusual. We have a technology committee. We have a profitability committee.
Wow.
And our profitability committee, we are openly sharing profitability data with those profitability committee members on every franchisee in our system. We do it by cohort, so based upon how long franchisees have been in the system and based upon weekly revenue, but based upon within those tranches, at a franchisee level, what's the profitability? And so if their margin is this, what's the profitability? If their labor overhead is this, what's their profitability? So we know what the levers are that we need to work with and where we need to optimize franchisees, and it allows us to work with our profitability committee members for them to sponsor roundtables at annual conference as to the things where they need to help their peers improve margin through rate increases, improve margins by minimizing overtime through better recruiting. So the data tells us how the business model needs to iterate. Without the data, we don't know what to focus on. But because of the data, we do know exactly what to focus on. Same thing on managing the business in terms of how many people in the office do you need at certain levels of business size. Our franchisees on the profitability committee are able to look at that across franchisees of different sizes to say, okay, at a $50,000 a week business, you should need 16-17% salary load of that business. And if you're at 19%, do you have someone that you haven't let go? And do you not know how to have a difficult conversation with an employee? The data is very telling as to what the triage is. And certainly we have coaches to help franchisees through. But with joint employer being very risky on us being able to have conversations with our franchisees on employment matters. It needs to be franchisees
Got
helping
it.
their peers around employment matters to really get to breakthrough profitability. And our data lets us know through the profitability committee focus of how do we help leverage franchisees that are doing well to help other franchisees be able to optimize. So I think we have taken investments in technology, turned data into stories,
Actionable.
and made it actionable.
Yeah. At what point did you implement that?
The profitability
that
committee about 3 years ago. We put performance groups in place about 4 to 5 years ago, and we saw that performance groups, which are groups of 8 to 10 franchisees that we sponsor, and we've got about 20 performance groups going. So we've got about 150 or so of our franchisees in a performance group. They're getting together 3 to 4 times per year, talking about how do they optimize their business model. What are the initiatives they have in place to do that? How are they driving revenue? How are they driving margin? How are they making changes in mix? How are they holding their team accountable? How are they making changes in their team? We knew that we had to help peer-to-peer, especially as joint employer started coming on the scene.
Yep.
And about the same time joint employer came on the scene, we started looking to performance groups so we could have more peer-to-peer interaction in a safe environment.
Yeah.
Awesome. And, we will come back to the joint employer part in a second because I know that
It's a sexy topic.
yeah, it's very, very sexy. But you are somebody who is definitely an expert on it, especially due to a lot of your work you've done on the Hill and all that. So we'll definitely come back to that because I think it'll be helpful for people to kind of see that perception. But you did touch on a lot of the tools that you guys are using from a franchisee relationship standpoint. Would love to just, anything on a personal level that you've kind of seen in terms of secrets that you have to kind of maintain that really good relationship with franchisees that people may be able to glean from it all.
Yeah, I do strategic planning with our franchisees. I do probably 4 to 5 sessions. That's a day and a half. I conduct it and lead it personally. So a set of 12 franchisees will be in a room with me where I'm facilitating how can I help them get their business to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Every brand new franchisee that comes into the business, even though we're 335 location business, $500 million in sales, I'm still in the classroom every single month when we have brand new franchisees start. That's
Wow.
important to me. I do 4 hours of leadership training. I want them to know how they can grow and scale, and I want them to know what the first 5 to 6 years of the journey of being a franchisee is going to look like, because they might forget in that first year when days are long and things are tough. And that's really important to set that foundation. So I have those intimate relations of being in the classroom with every franchisee when they start, and then they have an opportunity to sign up and come to strategic planning. Again, I'm doing that 4 to 5 times per year, so pretty accessible. I'm very involved with our Franchise Advisory Council. It's 8 members. We have 4 regions of the country, 2 members. That's a full day meeting. We have it coming up in about 3 weeks. And then we meet all day, and then I cook everybody dinner in my home. And as you know, I love to cook, and
Yes.
we're going to do pot roast here shortly. But being able to kind of break bread and work hard during the day, but also say, this is a family. We're all working hard and we're taking care of families. But at the end of the day, BrightStar system is a family, and I invite you into my home and I'm going to cook dinner for you. And that's about servant leadership. And I think that builds relationships and allows, when times are hard or you're having to enforce compliance, it's done with all of the right heart and intentions of making us a better system to be able to have a difficult conversation with a franchisee when there's a strong relationship that's already built. And as I travel, I try to host dinners. I was just in Dallas seeing Catherine Munson, who's a dear friend of mine, so I stayed over and hosted all of our Dallas franchisees. Then I went down to see another dear friend, Doc Cohen, in Houston, and Doc came and gave some of his wisdom to the Houston franchisees, and I hosted a dinner there. So when I'm in a market, I try to host a group of franchisees to get together. And I think taking the time to break bread and spend an evening, I think, goes a long way to give franchisees just talk about whatever they want to talk about and also have access. And I think that, in addition to all the committees that I mentioned and the performance groups or strategic planning or things like that we do, I think that's important We do the normal, annual conference every year. I think we do something incremental to that that's unusual, and we do a branch leadership conference every year as well for all of our franchisees managers.
Oh, wow.
So in the spring we do a branch leadership conference. Some of our franchisees attend, but it's for all of their managers, so we can have access to be able to inform on the strategies that we believe are important. And then in the fall, we have our franchisees that we're influencing as well through our franchisee annual conference. So I know most systems do the franchisee annual conference. Some have moved to it every 2 years. We continue to believe it's important to culture to do it every year. But we do the branch leadership conference to make sure as well we have access to the 3 or 4 top managers for each of our franchisees. So we typically have 400, 500 people at our branch leadership conference to influence every year. That's how we try to influence our culture beyond just our franchisees.
Wow.
Well, that led into the next question, which was on the topic of culture. By the way, you wrote a book. We don't have time to talk any about that. I'd highly recommend folks, if they haven't got the book, get the book. What's the name of it?
Grow Smart, Risk Less.
Yep.
I mean, it's a little dated. I wrote it, back when I was kind of first starting up. But for those that are starting up a franchise, probably relevant to make sure that you should franchise your business, because not all franchises will be successful, and not all franchisors probably should franchise their business. But in kind of the blocking and tackling of what vendors you should think about, and how do you think about building a franchise sales team, and some of the first hires you should make, and what did I do right and what did I do wrong? Very transparent.
Highly relevant for this audience, emerging franchisors. Let's go ahead and switch into the topic of threats, because we are bumping up against time. As you look at joint employer and all the things going on the Hill, what threats are you seeing, and what should folks be looking at and aware of and concerned with?
I think joint employer is the biggest threat that we're concerned about. It certainly creates a big risk in being able to support franchisees in the way we would want to support franchisees. We're already working on a large initiative to move payroll outside of our core technology, so that we would instead take the information into our technology versus have our technology feed an outside payroll provider. So that is probably 20,000 hours worth of work that could have otherwise been revenue generating initiatives versus something to risk mitigate against joint employer. So that's unfortunate, because that's time that we could have spent otherwise. But I think joint employer is the first step towards collective bargaining. And so having franchisees understand it isn't about the franchisor or the franchisee. It really is, what are those outside forces that are trying to come between that relationship? And I think that's really dangerous. And what are the outside motivations as to why you would want to disrupt something that has worked so well for decades?
Yep.
And so that is likely one of the biggest threats. I think the other is access to the right labor, and how are we going to get immigration right? And I don't know that I have seen yet the right strategy on that. We're very strained on finding enough labor. I know the restaurant sector is very strained on finding enough labor. So I think we're going to have to find a compassionate strategy, but also that allows employers to find more unskilled labor, because there isn't enough to be able to fill the jobs that are unfilled today, and grow the economy in the way we need to grow it. And so I think that's another. And I think that minimum wages are going to continue to increase, and I'm not saying that that's not the right thing to do, but in some industries that means dollar for dollar increases in wages. It gets passed directly to the consumer, and what's the right balance there? We are in an industry where every dollar that goes to pay a caregiver more, that's at least $1, and really more once you add on workers' comp and payroll taxes. It's more like $1.50, $2 that needs to pass on to a consumer that lives on a fixed income when you're talking about seniors or disabled adults. And so that becomes a hard decisions. Now, we frequently are paying much more than minimum wage. A lot of our caregivers are making, $12 to $14 an hour. But at $15 an hour, that means you're saying that consumers are spending, $25 to $35 an hour to remain safely at home. And being at home is the lowest cost setting of care,
Yep.
where do things give across society? That becomes a difficult equation to balance.
Yeah.
Sure, and I'm happy that we got a chance to have you talk about that, because I think that there are very few people in the franchise space who know more about that than you do. So I'm happy that we had a chance to kind of go through that with you, because we often skip that question for a lot of people because they're kind of like, I don't really know. But obviously, you knew quite a bit, so that was always great. Something that I did want to go back to, because I think it is important to at least touch on for a little bit, is, do you have any strategies, from a franchise sales standpoint, anything that you think that people should, that stands out that they should know at the very beginning when they're just getting started with it, that, you wouldn't mind talking about for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, lead generation, I mean, the areas where we're finding our best leads is our own website. And so I think it's a lot of organic. I think that, it varies based upon the year, which
What works and what doesn't.
What works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, I think over the years it's been in some ways less about the lead flow and more about the lead qualification.
Mm-hmm.
And the best use of time and money that we have spent over the years has been in the design of our Discovery Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people do the Discovery Day. We have them come in and we do a dinner the night before. For me, that's very important to see how our potential franchisee interacts with the wait staff. I know the next day they're gonna be respectful to me and my C-suite if they're wanting to be approved. But if they won't look a server in the eyes and say please and thank you, they're not our kind of person. And I don't think you get to see people's true colors until you give them a couple of cocktails and you see them in a social setting and a meal. And so for us, I believe the same thing when I'm interviewing a C-suite for a job. But I think that's really been important in our design of our Discovery Day, is it always begins with a meal the evening before.
I like that.
I like that a lot.
I've heard her say that before, but I forget about it. Then when she says it again, I'm like, oh wow, I don't know people do that. It's just drinking, guys. It's not that big of a deal. So
and you've had a few times of experience with that, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So to close here, because I know that we are limited on time here. Looking back, I'm sure that there are a lot of things that you may have changed about your journey, but everything happens for a reason, of course. So, is there anything, any final advice that you have for people that something that you guys did that maybe they can learn from, so they don't do it as well, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think the things that I would do again and the things that I would change. The things that I would do again is get involved with the industry associations early. International Franchise Association, coming to the events, I think early are really important, whether that's International Franchise Association convention in February or Springboard or other kinds of events. I think that's really important. I think it also gives you a way to vet out who are the suppliers you should use. Those are some of the mistakes I made early. My first attorney was not someone who was heavily involved with the IFA, and I spent probably $75,000 more than I should have. I didn't get to the PR firm I use now until 2 iterations in, and I wasted a lot of money going through others who said they could do franchising and they weren't a franchise shop on the PR side. So I think there's a reason beyond the networking and the education to get involved with the industry and come to meetings. I think it's also to vet out the suppliers, so I think that's really important, and I would encourage that. I think it's also finding mentors, and whether it's an informal board of advisors or finding those that you can respect, that you're willing to bounce ideas off of, that are willing to give you a little bit of time. I think that's really important. So I think vet your suppliers. I didn't do that as well. Hire those that are experienced franchise folks if you're going to make that first or second hire, whether that's franchise sales or franchise support. Having someone, if you don't have a background in franchising, have someone who does on your core team. I waited until my 4th hire before I got that right. It should have been my 2nd hire after IT, and so that's what I wish I would have done. I got started with IFA pretty early. I'm glad I did, but I didn't leverage IFA to understand who I needed to hire as a supplier, and I should have connected those dots a little bit sooner.
Sure. Well, Shelly, we really appreciate your time, being, a former chair of the IFA and being a mentor to me and, of course, hopefully Ryan over the course of time, too, because you have so much to share. So I was really looking forward to this, so I really appreciate it, and I know Ryan does, too. So thanks
My
again.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We will see you soon.
Thanks.